What's up, my friends? How goes it today? Well, I'm going to make a video. It's going to be a little bit political, but not really. And it's definitely not aimed towards conservatives or pro-liberal or pro-conservative or anti-either this or that. What this video would be is anti-bullshit. And I think that we all need to put on our bullshit detectors and stop believing everything that we hear just through a commentary. Now, I could sit here and sound all pious and talk about how messed up the media is and how they're trying to, fool us and who owns which companies. And I see both sides. I realize the conservative and liberal media. I'm well aware of the right-wing push to decentralize reason and give people doubt about what's going on in the world. And this is how 99.9% of climate scientists can agree that that we're contributing to global warming, and yet the 0.03% that disagree are the ones that are pushed as saying, look, some of us disagree. The people who have money to make this happen, the people who basically run the governments of the world, are those who have the power because they have the resources. They have the resources because they have the power. And that's one of the circles that we live in, the cycles. The money and the resources have been passed down from person to person. There was a time in history when people could actually discover, there was a time before Standard Oil, before we had oil, and the company Standard Oil was just one of many companies who had discovered this great new, fossil fuel that we can use to burn in our engines. And that's just one example. But what happened was Standard Oil basically bought out and ran everybody else out of business so they could dominate the industry. This is what happens everywhere. It's a matter of us not having discussions anymore about things. It's a matter of saying either you're on my side or you're on their side. And this division is being pushed on the American people. And it obscures the true criminals of this world. Citizens United is a perfect example of what's wrong with this country. Citizens United was, people with very right-wing interests formed this group in order to basically say that corporations are people, and that corporations should be able to vote like people and to donate to candidates and to elections. For all the talk people do about crooked politicians and how messed up the system is and that there's no way to fix it, we really overcomplicate things. Because there's so much going on. It's easy to just bury our heads and say, oh man, this is too much. There's just too many things going on. And one of the conclusions that we might lead ourselves to is, the world has to fall apart in order for it to get better, or that this nation is going to collapse, or that we're going to totally destroy our planet, destroy ourselves and whatnot. Is this true? Does this have to happen? I don't know. I'm well aware of the term, things have to get worse before they get better. I also know that, this passive American 50s, back in the 50s, that mentality was maybe the calm before the storm. But that just because people are in disagreement now more than ever doesn't mean that we have changed our values or that we are divided because we have new ideas. It's that we're less willing to sit and have a discussion with somebody that we disagree with. This has the internet, through tweeting, Facebook groups, telephones, every other method of communication. We've managed to have people in office who are directly opposed to somebody else running for the same position, and maybe the two people have never even met, never even sat down and discussed things like one-on-one. And in the past, when legislators could sit and say, I don't agree with this, but I believe this, and they could have a drink together and maybe discuss how can we make this better for everyone. It's like someone said, then you walk away from that, and the next day, that one legislator is less likely to go on the news and talk about how his opponent is such a moron and an idiot, and he's a liar and he's a thief. This is where politics have gone. Rather than showing people, this is what I'm going to do for this country, or this is what I'm going to do for the people, it's what's wrong with the other person. And every election cycle has been that way. I stopped watching cable probably 6-7 years ago. Looking back, to commercials and how much they inundated us with that garbage, and not just the election garbage, but all the other crap that goes along with it. The mass marketing, the huge corporations, the drug ads that run for, 10 minutes on a station in the daytime. These very same companies are the ones who are buying the politicians, the ones who are putting people in office, because you can't make a promise to a company without having to fulfill your obligation. Part of the problem is things like Citizens United. If someone's allowed to give $1 million, $10 million, $1 billion to an election, they'll do it. Now let's say that they're banned from doing this, like One Person Solution, many people say this, that there should be, say, a cap of $100 donations max for individuals, and that only individual donations should go towards a candidacy. I can agree with this, but I also see the other side that people say, well, others would just, basically what they've done is, this is how they got around it, by using things like Citizens United, by saying, well, we're not actually for this candidate. We're just speaking for our own values. But if you try to shut people up and say, hey, you shouldn't do this, you can't spend $1 billion, backing up this candidate, they'll say, oh wait, now you're suppressing our freedom of speech. And that is how corporations came to get labeled as individuals. It's preposterous. It has nothing to do with freedoms. It has nothing to do with freedom of speech. It has to do with the millions of people whose speech is suppressed because they don't have the money to put it forward. In other words, unless the tables are fair and equal, nobody should be allowed to donate millions of dollars to a campaign. But these are just big issues, but that are hardly being dealt with because most people are stuck on one media or the other. Rather than stating your policy, you're talking shit about every other candidate. And this is the exact same thing that's happening with the media, on both sides, yes. Liberal media got to the point where I couldn't even listen to some of the NPR stuff years ago, because I started seeing how they were pulling out assumptions and biases that maybe weren't 100% true. And even if there was some truth to it, I could just sense that this is a commentary and not news. Now, Fox News, for those who really still think that Fox News, which recently changed from fair and balanced to the real news is their new quote. Their new slogan is the real news. They have basically worked the system and catered to the GOP, to anybody who is, and these are the same people who are all out for personal rights, so they claim, but in the end they're all out for personal gain and millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and don't really care what the average citizen has to go through. And I'm not saying that people should care about every single person, or that, let's put it this way, a different way to word that would be, I understand when somebody who considers themselves a conservative says, people are, sucking the money out of the system, there's people out there who won't work, there's people out there who just want to sit there and live on welfare and never do anything for themselves, and just take money from the government. So therefore, we believe that the government shouldn't give welfare to people. And then a person would say, well, what happens if you need help? What if we all need help? I mean, isn't this what makes us a nation? And then you get into the argument about details and whether or not how much should be given to certain people, what the conditions for that should be. But setting all that aside, look at people in general. Most people want to do something. They want to work. They want to be functioning in their society. They want to be a member. But we are so oppressed and not even realizing it that often that's not a choice for some people, especially if you live in an area where your upbringing was very poor and you don't have many resources. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just makes it more difficult for those who don't have money and resources. And that's not even getting into race or culture or religion. Yes, people are oppressed, and yes, people disagree with policies. That is what makes America America. When people compare America, for example, to Finland or something, let me give you an example. I consider myself a liberal-minded person, but even Michael Moore can make me cringe, when he's making a comparison to America with Finland or with Switzerland. I'm like, wait a minute, these are white countries, small white countries that don't have many of the same issues that we have in America. But that doesn't discount it. That doesn't mean that it can't happen or that we can't improve ourselves to help the citizens first, where the schools actually feed their children decent foods and meals, where they care about the individual, because they know that if the individual is sick, if the individual is ill, if the individual doesn't feel like they have any power, then the whole society fails. And that's what's happening in America. We are in the decline of not American values, because I have a hard time really looking back and saying, when was America great, okay? Was it in the 50s? When everybody was, just quietly living their lives while America was slowly invading other countries through coups? Is it during 1900, which a lot of people seem to think was the great time, when women couldn't vote, when the Pinkerton securities were killing off people, individuals who were protesting for fair wages? American history is obscured. It doesn't mean that we have to play like we've never, it doesn't mean that we have to pretend like it's being hidden from us. It's that we haven't sought it out. It's that nobody's out there telling you how much your ancestors fought for what we have now. We've become spoiled brats in a lot of ways, and we don't realize that just because the government's not functioning the way we want it to, doesn't mean that there aren't sects and segments of it that are functioning, that people do care. That yes, there are elected officials who do care about us. There are people who work for the schools and work for even the oil companies that do care, that understand and want to do things right, but understand that things are complicated. You can't just turn off all the oil pumps tomorrow and go to electric cars. That's sometimes the mindset that the liberals put out, and this is why it gives this idea of a Democrat, or I hate even using the terminology, could just say left and right. But people say, oh, look at the leftists. They're just trying to make everything equal and take everybody else's money. And you have these fat, rich white guys smoking cigars, talking, Rush Limbaugh type motherfuckers. And they're trash. And every one of them will tell you the same thing, like guys like him and Hannity on Fox News. They'll say they're commentators. There are plenty of times when people have asked him, do you believe what you're saying? And they'll say, hey, I say what gets people excited. I say what brings the emotion. And... one second. Sawyer. Never fails. Kids always need something. And as a parent in this country, I guess that was, when my kids were born. I was a person who had worked for myself and worked for others. I had never really needed any assistance from the government. I never had insurance. And then something happened. There was a complication in the pregnancy. We had to have a C-section, and all of a sudden we were freaking out. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to pay for all this stuff? And we managed to get retroactive state assistance for that, or federal assistance, whichever it was, and it saved our asses. It allowed us to not go so far into debt that we couldn't, even raise our kids, or where we were anxious. Some other countries have policies where they understand this. In Europe, they'll get up to, in some places like, not Finland, I think it's in, not France. Many of the countries over there are like this. I think in Germany, they get up to 8 weeks of vacation per year. And if you have a child, you get up to 5 months of maternity leave, and it's paid. And people will say, well, that's ludicrous. No employer should have to pay their employees this way. There should be the federal government shouldn't tell employers what they have to pay. But in a lot of cases, they don't. The employers understand, because of the practices that they uphold, that over time, workers respect their jobs more. They work harder. They care more. When your workers are sick and you're not taking care of your people, your business is going to fail. And this is what's happening to our nation. It's a nation of sick people. And it's not just about sicknesses, colds, or illnesses, or disease. It's about we're sick in the head because we don't know where to go. We have half the nation saying we can improve this, we can fix this. And then others half saying, it's going to fall apart, screw it. And I'm somewhere in the middle saying, it's got to get worse before it can get better, but I really want to hold out hope that we can pull our heads out of our asses. And the answer to this isn't, what happened in the housing crisis in '08. People just forget all about it, This was bad policies. because the banks didn't want regulations, companies didn't want regulations. So they ended up totally screwing the economy by giving out bad loans and then putting the blame on the people and saying, oh, lazy people defaulting on their loans. Well, there's a reason why there were set up, systems in place to screen and check to make sure a person is able to pay for these things. This is what credit is. Credit's a horrible thing, but it's not perfect. But it's the way that we understand whether we can afford something or not. And I won't even get into the credit thing. I despise the credit companies and the numbers and all that. But instead of dealing with the problem in '08, what did they do? Congress sat down and said, we're going to raise the debt ceiling. Now, these are the people who caused this problem. These are the same ones who are always talking about how our country's going into debt and how we have all these problems and we can't afford to take care of people. When Bernie Sanders brought up the idea that we could give free tuition to public colleges, everybody raised a big stink and saying, oh, well, who's going to pay for this? Why should we have to pay for kids' college? They can deal with their own problems. But people didn't blink an eye when they gave a $100 million increase, which was twice what it would cost to give free college tuition to the people who want it or need it. Just the increase alone on military spending this year for the next year's budget was enough to do exactly what he wanted to do. This was even, they even asked for, I think, $60 billion and got like a $100 billion increase, enough to buy another, 20 fighter jets and 10 Navy ships. Anybody who thinks the U.S. military is necessary at this point, in the vast size that we have it, is just delusional. Our nation makes its money off of weapons, off of fear, and the very few people who are benefiting from that is definitely not the American citizens. So hopefully people wake up wake up to the reality that you're living in a dystopia. It's not 1984. It's not quite the Orwellian society, but in many ways it is. But here's the thing. The state's not mandating what you see and hear. You're choosing what you see and hear. But they're putting it out there through things like Fox News, which is completely biased nonsense. And they put these big fancy screens and banners, big flashy signs across the screen, and they sit there and they scream at you and tell you, don't you know you're being screwed over? Don't you know those liberals in Hollywood, they're trying to take your rights away? And the tables have been completely turned, and people are buying into it. They're believing it. They're believing that media today is actually journalism. And almost all media gets their information from people who do the journalism. Like, for example, when I want to look at the headlines, do I go to NBC or CBS or Fox? No, because then I'll just hear people's personal opinions. I go to AP. I read the headlines. Associated Press is a nonprofit. Do they have an AP setup of what they can and can't say and how to word things? Of course they do. Are there stories that they miss? Of course. Have they made mistakes in the past? Of course. But the idea is that they have journalists that are traveling to places. And AP, whenever you watch the news and they're showing video in the background of, say, the flood or eruption or volcano, whatever it might be, none of these stations are doing their own videos. They're all using AP clips. If you go to the AP site, you'll just see them filming with just silence, and the people can buy and use this information from them. But people don't want to hear the news. They don't want to see the true headlines. They don't care what's really going on. All they care about is who's agreeing with them and telling them what they want to hear. And so all I see is a lot of rhetoric and bullshit. I say, if there was a really good show I watched, it was called My Dad Was Brainwashed, or how the media brainwashed my dad or something. It was on like a Amazon Prime, so if you've got that, you can look it up. But it was pretty interesting. But it talked about this family who made this documentary because her father they'd grown up with, he was always a nice guy, seemed happy and whatnot. And then one day he had a longer commute to work for his new job, so he started listening to talk radio. And he started listening to Rush Limbaugh, like daily, for like 2 or 3 hours a day. And within, I don't know how long, a year or so, and then for years after that, he was just constantly talking about repeating everything that he heard on there. Oh, these liberals and Hollywood and all these problems, and they just couldn't understand. His family didn't get how he could be so brainwashed. It's because he's listening to one person. It's because you're listening to an individual. And as long as you are getting your news from an individual, you'll never get the real news. You'll never get the facts. You'll never understand what's really going on, because there's the emotion that's tied up with it. That when Sean Hannity's screaming at you and they're bringing on some douchebag liberal that they can make look bad, some of these people are just bought and paid for, so many of them, but the ones that actually care are squeezed into the middle. And I like to give, the credit where credit's due, and I know that there are people out there that are trying and do care. There's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He said, give the people the facts, and the country will be safe. So many previous presidents and founding fathers and mothers have provided us with very simple quotes that are repeated, such as, if you let the banks take control of public policy, then, the people will always be enslaved. All these things that people knew. They saw it coming. Is it prophecy or premonition? No, of course not. It's just basic common sense. You don't have to look at where our society's going. All you have to do is look at Rome. Look at any other collapsed society and ask yourself, what went wrong? And it's when they went to the age of information and then straight into the age of decadence, because you should go from an age of information into an age of improvement and trying to help the society, and people don't know where to go. I think people are smarter than that. I think people know where they want to go. I think society knows better, but there are people throwing a monkey wrench in that and convincing us that we don't care about one another, and getting people to fight amongst themselves. So by merely putting out your opinion, people will call you every name in the book. They might not even know you or know where you really stand. If you're on one side, you get attacked by the other side, and everybody else behind you will go, yeah, right on. If you go to the other side, you'll get the same thing from that side. But if you're in the middle, the moderates, we're the ones that get the most crap. It's the most difficult place to be for politicians or for just individuals. Calling yourself an independent tells people you're wishy-washy, that you don't know what you stand for. And you say, well, why would I believe with any one person's policy or one side that believes that it's a side issue? We don't have to agree on all the processes, but we can't disagree on values, and that's where it all falls apart. Our values have to be consistent with what we believe in our hearts, and you feel it here long before you know it in there. Doesn't mean that our hearts can always tell us the details. That's up to us to decipher. So anyway, that's my ramble about politics for the day. I hope we wake our asses up, but time will tell. Talk to y'all later.